Yeah, I think there are two wings that emerge out of this. One is a more cynical wing, where you realize that you can use this idea of subjective group truths to attack any ideas that you don't think currently are advantaging your groups. So, for example, if you are an advocate of a racial group or an ethnic group that's not doing very well in science, say, and then rather than saying to the individuals in those groups, well, you need to get your act together and do better at science because everybody needs to know something about science, what you can do is to say, well, what I'm actually interested in is just getting my group's members, more of them to have university degrees so that they can get positions of social standing. And what I want really is a kind of affirmative action in science grading, that they're not doing very well, but they have to take these science courses. So what we should do is grade them at a different standard. And so you're introducing a double standard at that point. And it's very hard, of course, for people trained in a modern universalistic way of thinking about things to say no, to countenance double standards. So what you can then do is to say, well, the reason why we are making everybody do science is that, say, European people of European ancestry, or whites or males who are traditionally doing very well in sciences and came up with it. It's their way of thinking, and they have just kind of forced it down the throats of everybody else, and that was a great unfairness. And you can do that then to put those guys on the defensive. So science then doesn't have these universalistic pretenses anymore. And then people who are more likely to be hard in grading will say, oh, well, maybe I'm being unfair to people who aren't white or aren't of European ancestry and more likely to go along with the affirmative action in grading type of program. Now, that's a cynical reading, but there are any number of people in higher education and broadly speaking who will go that route. Now, the other route, though, is a more of a true believer, where they really will say that they believe there are different routes to knowledge, or that there is no such thing as knowledge, that everything really is just subjective. And so from their perspective, they will say, science, logic, mathematics, those don't have any better standing cognitively than intuition or feeling or various kinds of group traditions. And then on the basis of that, they will quite, I would say, honestly, in their own thinking, then say we should lessen the scientific curriculum, not require certain groups of people to have a general, well-rounded education along traditional modernist liberal lines. And so you have a debate then between those who say, no, in fact, science and math and logic are universal and everybody needs to know them, and those who want to get out of it on subjectivist group grounds.
Is it fair to say that this has begun in the universities, because that is obviously is where philosophy is formed, and its success is due to basically how well the postmodernists have been able to reframe the debate of political discourse? And you've also talked about how university administrators, they're not really adherents to it, but they just don't want to disrupt the money flow, the money coming in from government, have a bad reputation. And the fact that these people and their adherents are so aggressive. There's all those videos on YouTube of students screeching at university administrators saying, how dare you, that it's just easier for them to just tolerate them and enable them to just let things run how they consider smoothly.
Right. Yeah, we should expect the most extreme manifestations to happen first in universities, because we do, in a way, set universities up as a laboratory for ideas. And we encourage people to have extreme, original, bizarre ideas and to play them out. And then when a certain set of bizarre ideas gain some traction, we are going to see some strange results. So in a way, it's an intended consequence of what we want universities to do. And I do think you're right in pointing out it does start among the professoriate, among the intellectuals, and a lot of the arguments that have the most traction are philosophy type arguments. And so the way philosophy was being done 2 generations ago, we're now seeing that very widespread in some universities and spilling out. But yes, universities are not only what the professors do. We now have well-trained students. And so the students, it's interesting that a lot of the postmodern speech codes and forms of censorship used to be directed at students. But one of the interesting things in the last generation is that the students are now learning that they can take those same speech codes and the same arguments for it and start to use them against their professors. So we now have a two-way battle sometimes that goes on there. But then also there are the administrators, and I think administrators crudely should be divided into 2 broad categories. I'm speaking mostly about North American universities, the ones I know best. There's the whole student services wing, and they look after student life, organizing events and sometimes guest speakers and entertainment programs and looking after residence life and so on. And in many institutions, those have been co-opted by various forms of postmodernism as well, or applied postmodernism. So you see some of the worst indoctrination and political correctness in the bad sense manifested there. Those tend to be more true believer types. You also mentioned administrators who don't function in the student services part of the university. Rather, they are deans and provosts and development officers who are charged with raising money, and the president and so forth. And here, I don't want to speak with too broad a brush, but standardly, if you are in charge or the president of a university now, the priority of job functions for you are first, fundraising, second, administrative efficiency, keeping the organization going, and then third, being a figurehead, and perhaps fourth, having some sort of educational mission that one is advocating for. But the way it typically goes, since university presidents are so busy, is that those get treated in that order. And so anything that's going to be a threat to their ability to raise funds, anything that causes problems and dissent within the university and leads to administrative inefficiencies, those are the things that they will be most attentive to. And it's I think a natural, I don't want to say it's quite bureaucratic, although sometimes it is, because that can be a pejorative, is just to want any problems that arise just to go away. And rather than doing the difficult thing of saying we have some dirty laundry and let's air the dirty laundry, or here we have a difficult case and let's be very careful that we are engaged in due process and being fair and just to everyone, that what you want is for that problem to be swept under the carpet, not to get the bad publicity, not to have to exert a great deal of effort and expense to solve the problem fairly. And so to a large extent, that enables pathological manifestations of political correctness to get a lot more traction. They get their way, and then they get their way a little bit more the next time. And there's a passivity on the part of the administration that enables those pathological manifestations to grow.
It reminds me how it's manifested in other forms in society. For example, conservative talk show hosts, there's always threats to boycott advertisers on that program, and corporations these days, because they just don't want to deal with the barrage of 1-star reviews they'll get on social media, just cave in.
Sure. Oh, yes, absolutely. So if you're going to take on controversial issues, difficult issues, and you're going to be a principled person, there are all sorts of social forces that can make your life miserable, including going after your advertisers and your pocketbook. So, I, in fact, don't have any problem with people voting with their pocketbook and people trying for boycotts and so forth, because that then is a peaceful way of expressing your displeasure. I do think it becomes different when we start talking about state institutions, because state institutions have the power of the police and the military behind them, and that's a different can of worms.